Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures comedy fantasy series of novels and short stories. And with me is Sam West. We're going to be talking about the spell Mass Suggestion. All right. I guess this is Suggestion Plus.
Yeah.
What do you
Mass
think?
Suggestion, it's a sweet spell. This is a weird one in that this is a spell I want to cast at 9th level and really nothing else. But it's good in every instance else you can cast it, I think. This is an effect that will, in combat, will have niche applications, but very powerful ones when it does come up. Out of combat, this is just so cool. The things you can do with Mass Suggestion and 12 people, you can get into some really morally questionable territory, but have a really major impact on politics globally, on the nature of a town's opinion on you, of a whole suite of weird things. That's very
Is this
cool.
what Jesus did?
I hope not, but maybe.
That's where the apostles came from.
Therefore, Mass suggested. Oh my God.
All right. Well, let's start with combat then. We'll save the fun stuff for later. Now,
Okay.
this spell is not dependent on how the targets feel about you already, correct?
I believe not. It just says
Right.
each creature makes the save. If it fails, it pursues the course of action.
Because I know there's some
That's
spells,
it.
maybe it's in different editions, but where their attitude toward you will change from hostile to neutral and neutral to friendly or something. I might be
That's
thinking
how.
of third edition.
Well, that's how charm person works in this edition too, I believe.
All
I
right,
believe
all right,
creatures
there
that
it
are
is.
hostile towards you have advantage on saving throws against some of these kinds of effects. Notably not suggestion, though, which is weird because this is definitely one of, if not the most powerful spells you can be doing. At least a second, as just suggestion as a second level spell in combat, suggesting someone go run off into the rafters and never come back is very good.
Yeah, or I suggest you stop stabbing me.
Yeah. I mean, they'll stab other people. Maybe just stop stabbing. This is where, you got to get your little devil lawyer out that checks all the T's or checks all the I's or cross all the T's and dots all their I's, right? Make sure that you're suggesting the exact right course of action or things can backfire on you horribly. But in combat, like having the ability just to take up to 12 minions and or big bads and tell them to go away or tell them to drop their weapons or give you all of their weapons or I don't know, roll around on the floor pretending to be armadillos for an hour, it can single-handedly win an encounter. That being said, oftentimes the creatures that are going to be affected by this are lower CR because they're not going to legendary resist it. Often the creatures that are going to be affected by this, I mean, they're not going to... The course of action has to seem reasonable to them. And if you're actively trying to kill them, that's where things can get a little bit messy.
Well, all right, let me pose this question though. It says it seems reasonable, and it gives examples like you can't order them to stab themselves or fall on a spear or immolate themselves, but doesn't say anything about turning on their friends. Like, for example, you got the big bandit boss and all those, has 12 minions. Can you say, all right, guys, go turn on your boss?
If you can word it in a way that makes them think it's a reasonable course of action, yes. And this is why I don't talk about suggestion as much as I talk about stuff like Cold Person. This is why I don't talk about suggestion as much as I talk about other Saber dice. This spell will really get its money out of DMs that say yes to everything. And DMs that are like, that's really dumb, that doesn't work that way, that's unreasonable, will make this spell substantially worse. So you could think of it like, if you're in this exact encounter, right? Let's say for some reason you're using a 6th level slot to take a bunch of CR1 4th bandits and turn them on their boss. Conceivably, you could make the argument of, well, these are paid guns for hire. They are out to do what they feel is best fiscally. As part of your suggestion includes a bribe, it becomes very reasonable for them to say, I will turn on my boss because this suggestion is, if I turn on my boss, there's upside for me for some reason. If you can word it in a manner that takes advantage of personality and makes a reasonable course of action seem justifiable, that's where the spell is really powerful. But again, if you have a DM that's like, these people have been working together for 12 years, that is unreasonable course of action to them, you don't know that necessarily. You going
Right.
into an encounter with monsters, you don't necessarily know where their mind space is, how their relationship with their boss is. You don't know if like there may be groups of like lizard folk or groups of gnolls that find retreat entirely unacceptable culturally, that are just like, it is never reasonable to retreat. So even suggesting you something like that to retreat might seem unreasonable to them based off of the creature's existence, based off of their personality, their entity, their deep inner self, right? That's if your DM cares about that. That's if your DM thinks about all the little nuances of the monsters they're running, all the different societies and stuff that they are constructing within this world. If your DM's just yoinking things from the monster manual and sticking them into a field for you to fight, that's probably going to be less of an issue. If your DM is like, you're delving into an Underdark city full of this very carefully crafted Duergar and their really complex societal conflict with themselves, with others, with dwarves, with, you know, a whole bunch of giant, larger scaling moral questions, this spell all of a sudden is going to require you to be much more specific and a little bit more creative with it. And that's why I think I love it so much. That's why I think the spell is, and like when I'm talking about mass suggestion, but also suggestion, they're both kind of interchangeable in this instance as far as their scope. This is the kind of thing that really rewards players that either are just power gamers in a power gamer environment, which is a-okay. If that's the game you're playing and DM's like, yeah, biggest CR thing you can fight, go, and you can use suggestion as a saber die, great, happy for you, it's great there. If you're in a situation where it's a heavy roleplay environment, if you're in a situation with lots of world building, lots of exploration, grand movie scheme kind of stuff, this spell will reward you for knowing, learning, and remembering things about the environment. It will reward you for making insight checks, getting a decent reads on monsters you're fighting time and time again, and figuring out what is reasonable and unreasonable for those groups of creatures, which will make the spell feel really cool to use whenever you are like, I'm using things that the DM has told us, I'm using things about the world that we're in to influence them in a way that is unique, that is reasonable, that is they feel could be a course of action they're willing to take. And that's where I think suggestion really shines for me as a spell.
Now, just to be clear, this isn't like Charm Person where they're just your buddies. This is you. It's got a 24-hour duration, but you only get one suggestion, correct? You can't.
One suggestion.
The duration, right? The duration is just the time it takes for them to carry it out. But you don't get to say like, go bring me a beer and make me a sandwich. And no, you can't just keep suggesting things.
So there's a caveat there. You can, if you can make it a reasonable course of action to like be your servant for the evening, right? If you can figure out a way to be like, I want you to bring me the next 12 drinks from the bar and make it sound reasonable to the person. Like, I want you to cover my tab for the evening and keep bringing me beverages. I want you to be my friend for this whole night, right? You can finagle your way into long-term arrangements. And that's where things get very messy. This is where wording becomes very important.
Yes. All right. I see what you're saying. But my original question was, you get one suggestion.
Yes. You can suggest one course of action that all 12 must take. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's take it out of combat. Let's go get that beer and, whatever.
Okay. This is an endlessly useful spell out of combat. Again, I really want to cast it whenever I'm getting a year's worth of the suggestion and finding the exact right suggestion that will last the full duration and get these people to do exactly what I want. That is hard to come up with and will often backfire horribly on you. But this is the kind of effect where you can be wanted for murder and turn the judge into the villain. You can be out to... Like there can be a corrupt council that is, taking advantage of all of its citizens, basically serfdom for everyone. You can be dealing with groups of individuals that hold positions of power over others. And you can kind of shape them to reframe society. You can kind of shape it so that you can adjust the world you're playing in with the opinions and powers of 12 other individuals. It's up to 12. It probably won't always be 12. You're most likely going to be getting like a little over half of them to do your bidding. But should you get a good enough command, should you give a command like deeply reflect on the conscious moral quandaries that your actions are providing others, and you can cause some existential crises, you can do some weird things. Whether or not that's useful is going to very much depend on the game, but you can definitely get some weird, wacky, large scope context stuff to get radically changed. You can even do things right, like if you're in some kind of like noble democracy where the nobles get varying votes, being able to convince 8 nobles to vote a specific way for the rest of the duration, that can change the outcome of big politics stuff. Outside of the big politics stuff, though, if we're talking like just using it to explore the world, convincing 12 goblins to go report back what they see around the dungeon, and you figure out which ones don't come back to you. Obviously, you know what paths are super dangerous and going to kill you and what paths you get other information from. This can be a way that you can take advantage of large groups of creatures to give you lots of reconnaissance information at once. The duration of 24 hours means you can just, if you find 12 kobold workers that are looking for something to do, and you can just say, hey, I bet there's money in there. I suggest you all go scope it out and come back to me with a report about what you see. You can scope out and get the general understanding of environments before you enter into them. Even in dungeon encounters where you're going through and finding guards and finding, evil creatures that are trying to manipulate you, having the ability to either turn them against each other, like you suggested earlier, or turn them to do practical uses for you, like suggest that, oh, we're actually the janitorial staff coming in to clean the dungeon. Can you give us a lift to that upper level? We can't quite reach it from here, to the manticore that's supposed to guard the place. If it finds that as a reasonable course of action, you just got yourself a free elevator ride, all for the cost of a spell slot. Mass suggestion is a little bit worse in that the individual monsters are going to be much more common than the large groups of them that you want to suggest. But if you're in instances where you have large groups of them that you need to construct something, or you need to repair something, or you need to infiltrate something, or you need
to spring a bunch of traps.
Yep, this spell will do that for you. It very much depends on the environment you're in, but I find that if you can find 12 creatures, you'll probably find a use for mass suggestion. And it'll make it you can either do it in very silly, large scope ways of, hey, let's start a rave and just get your 12 monsters go in the bar and start tearing things up to cause a distraction. Or you can do it in much more practical ways, like you said, like just sending in the kobolds to set off traps.
Now, there are ways you can do this without mass suggestion.
Yes.
With the caveat that it sounds like a reasonable course of action. A couple of gold pieces might give you the same effect, and then if the kobolds set off traps and die, then you get your money back.
That's true.
Plus whatever they had.
It definitely helps that it's compulsion versus willingness. I think helps a lot. Once they're compelled to do the reasonable course of action, they will do it, regardless if they find it to be reasonable in doing it, right? So if they think it's reasonable to go delve into the dungeon until they can't come back, because that'll have a bunch of traps. If they find that's reasonable, not knowing that there are traps laying in wait in there, if you're like, oh, hey, go into that spooky cathedral by yourselves, and they're like, that seems reasonable, there's nothing dangerous about it, and they run in and die, they'll keep running in and dying because they'll continue to say, this is the reasonable course of action I started on. I will continue taking this course of action till its completion. So as long as they find it reasonable out the gate, they will, I believe, continue to do it regardless if they find it reasonable during the process of doing it. And I think that is sort of the big factor that separates this from just giving people gold, is if they're finding like, oh, I made a horrible deal and things are going south, they will continue to do the action regardless. They can't just all of a sudden opt out of the suggestion. They are in it for its duration. So that's going to give you situations that gold won't ever buy you. Like someone, if their life is on the line and they don't know their life is on the line, suggestion will hold out for until death, whereas gold will probably bail the moment they see it.
All right. What about in your notes you have as using this as a DM tool? Are you suggesting using it on the players, like as a quest giving? Or
good call. I don't think you should suggest players often. I think if you do suggest players, it needs to be like a very specific circumstances that with the aimed goal of like highlighting a character flaw. So if you have a paladin, or more likely you have like a thievy rogue, right? A rogue that likes stealing from people. Using that as a means of turning the party against the rogue, it can be a way of being like, all right, the goal of suggesting them to steal from the party in this instance is to teach the rogue a lesson to not steal from the party, is to teach the rogue to grow as a character and move on from bad habits. I think suggestion can create conflict there, but that can be a DM way to use it. But what I was talking about more as a DM spell, as a world building spell. This is a spell that you give to your big bads to make it so for 30 days they have finite control over a small town. So that over the course of a year, a lich has just every day cast a 9th level spell to make this town under their thumb and do exactly what they want them to do. Because you can continually recast this over and over again. It doesn't stop. You can suggest a creature 6 different times in the course of a year if you want to do different things, and that'll last the entire duration until they fail the wisdom save. So you can have it be very much so body snatch, or not necessarily body snatcher, but like you have the idea of everyone is under the control loosely of an evil entity, and as they're carrying out actions that they thought were reasonable at first are, you know, leading to ritual sacrifice, are leading to the unbelievable decimation of the world around them. That can be a tool as a sort of plot to investigate, right? To figure out why are these seemingly innocent townspeople destroying everything around them? Why are they sacrificing kobolds at midnight in their basements, not knowing what the reason is? Why are they, you know, doing these horrendous things? It can be because a creature has cast a higher level suggestion on them to carry out those tasks for some greater purpose. And it can sort of be the beginning of an intrigue plot to eventually find a big bad down the road that just has their hands and grips all over the world using 9th level suggestions.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right. Man, I can't think of anything we haven't covered. I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about, but
it's a robust spell.
Yeah.
You can talk about suggestion for hours.
All right, Sam's score.
This is I'm gonna go with 5 out of 5. It is really powerful. It will depend on your DM. Regardless of your DM, you'll find ways to use this in interesting ways. I think, you know, I'll give it a 4 out of 5 because I don't think it's as good as suggestion. Suggestion costs a 2nd level slot. It's gonna be way more applicable to way more players. As a 6th level slot, getting 12 creatures isn't honestly that much of an improvement, but it can do some things suggestion can't. So that's where I think this will find homes on your character sheets for the big, larger scope exploration tools and some niche combat ones where you'll be able to get the monsters to either turn on each other, flee from you, do weird things that they find spontaneously reasonable. This spell will find uses that are valuable in almost every game it's in.
Do you know off the top of your head if suggestion levels up?
Suggestion doesn't have any upcast. It always just lasts for 8 hours.
Okay, well, all right. That was suggestion because, well, all right, that yeah, the reason I asked is because of that whole lich thing with taking over the village and yeah, being able to cast it over and over again for extended periods of time is huge.
Yeah,
but
it's a really
not
cool.
something you could do with regular suggestion.
Nope. Plus suggestion,
right.
Regular suggestion requires concentration. This doesn't. So that's neat.
All right, guys, that was suggestion. Oh no, that was mass suggestion. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Sam. We will see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description where you'll find my Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, Sam's full review of the spell, and other fun things.